everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hoping well, and today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw a lot of crazy numbers, seeing that it is a holiday. Blessed Christmas to everyone out there. We are still in the midst of the Christmas season. Never forget that there are 12 days of Christmas from Christmas Day up until January 6th, the feast of the Epiphany of our Lord. So, Merry Christmas to everybody, and it is indeed New Year's Eve, so I hope everyone has a safe and blessed New Year's as well. But because of the holiday frame, there's just been numbers all over the place and a lot of spin being put out by many people in the mainstream media, especially the people over at Deadline and other publications like it, trying to run with some pretty silly numbers, kind of ignoring the fact of, okay, that might sound good on paper, but how much did they actually spend to get to X amount of money? I'm already hearing about people like Tony over at Deadline and Nance over at Deadline trying to throw numbers like $9 billion to the box office. That's amazing. Yes, but that's $9 billion in the actual grosses, that's actually being reported by the theaters, being reported in the box office reports every single week, not how much money they actually made. If you actually look at the vast majority of films from 2023, most movies didn't make their money back. And when it comes to major tentpoles, major big budget films, guess what? Those films ended up losing crap tons of money, but Tony's not going to run with that. Nance is not going to run with that, but we'll go ahead and give you the actual numbers as they currently stand and also what happened over this past holiday. Before going any further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, light up that fire button, and also smash the rumble button as well. And also make sure that you're subscribed to the channel with that bell notification. That way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. So first, Nance over at Deadline saying Warner Brothers titles deliver $700 million worldwide in December. Yes, that might be true. Biggest problem, of course, is that one of them, Aquaman 2, cost quite a bit of money and right now is set to be a box office loser when everything is said and done. So that $700 million coming at least from what's being made by that film is not going to do much of anything. When you look at what Wonka is doing, Wonka absolutely is going to be in a much better financial situation for sure, but you're starting to see the narrative very quickly unravel when they try to add these numbers together without actually taking into account the spend that it takes to get to X amount of money, because in the vast majority of these cases, they are losing crap tons of money. Wonka, as it says, though, nearing $400 million worldwide. It's a very good number for that film, especially with the budget that it had. This has been the absolute winner over the holiday frame, and just as I had been predicting earlier last week, and I think even just a couple weeks ago, saying what I thought was going to happen over the Christmas holiday frame, Wonka has won. Wonka has been able to edge out Aquaman 2. Keep in mind, with Wonka, this film has now been out for 3 weekends, where Aquaman 2 has only been out for 2. And when you look at that top 5 especially, look at how all of these other films that have been out for 1 or 2 weeks have seen increases, right? So Wonka, from its second weekend, saw an increase of 33%. Migration in its second weekend saw an increase in 38%. Even the film Anyone But You actually had a very good holiday frame too. Must have been getting some of the teenage, young adult couples coming out. Saw a 50% increase from its first week of release. And then you have, of course, had the new release in The Color Purple from Warner Brothers. But Aquaman, the only film in that top 5 that saw a 30% drop. So even though we would say, well, typically, we would look at the week 1 to week 2 drop as being a pretty big indicator about where a film is going to ultimately land. The biggest problem with this movie is that it is, again, in the midst of this holiday, which is why those numbers are not going to be the exact same, right? Remember that last weekend was Christmas Eve going into Christmas Day, and so because you had all of the holiday numbers going into it, that's why you have it where it is. The film, even amidst the holiday, though, has only gotten to $77 million domestically. So when we talk about this film getting to $260 million, like, again, what they try to talk about and they try to shove down your throats over at Deadline is that, that means the vast majority of that money is not coming domestically. It's actually coming from overseas, and something tells me I can guess what is going to be a major market for that movie, of which they only get a 25% cut, which means this film, it ain't going to be making money, and it's probably going to end up still being a pretty big box office loser. So anyway, Nancy and Tony continuing to be worthless over at Deadline, but hey, I always appreciate y'all's nonsense nonetheless. Going over to thenumbers.com, though, as we can see from Wonka, it did indeed won the number 1 spot at over 4,000 screens. It was also the widest release of the holiday frame. Even though it dropped 98 screens, still made $23.9 million. Again, a huge increase there. Has now reached $134.6 million. So again, do the math on that. And you can see this film was well over $100 million after 2 weeks. Aquaman is not even, it's barely over 75 million after 2 weeks. Gives you an idea of where these films ultimately stand, and also where Wonka is the one that's actually going to be bringing in some money for Warner Brothers, where Aquaman and most likely Color Purple will end up being financial losers. Absolutely Aquaman, most likely The Color Purple. We're going to see The Color Purple, I think, have a very similar effect, or have a very similar box office run as we saw for the remake that no one asked for. I think that this is another example of one of those things, but we saw it already happen with West Side Story, which also had around $100 million or so budget and did not make any money back, ended up being a financial loss for them. The film Migration ended up being again, another kind of winner, you could say, from Universal here, going up 38%, so doing pretty well with families. Only at $54 million, though, so definitely not as good as that probably could be or should be. The Color Purple at $13 million in its opening. This film opened this past Monday, so it is definitely going to be very weird tracking this movie because it's not going to have your typical week 1 to week 2 drop. But I think that a lot of these films are probably going to see some pretty massive drop-offs going into the non-holiday weekend with everyone going back to work, everyone going back to school this coming week. Expect to see some massive drop-offs on the Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursdays especially. And I think that by next weekend, we're absolutely going to see something very similar. We're entering into the month of January, the place where films go to die. So I think that other than films like Wonka, potentially, we're not going to see a whole lot of movement. I would not be surprised. Right? Again, I don't know of anything massively coming out the first weekend of January. January is not typically known for being a massive box office month in general. I think it's just mostly because a lot of studios kind of stay away from it, which is the reason why it's notoriously known for being a bad box office. It's not because films can't make money. It's that it's going to likely be the least amount of money you can make because most people have already been spending so much over the holiday frame. They're kind of using that time to recoup investments, to recoup funds and things like that. But anyway, I digress. Aquaman 2 got that number 2 spot, as I had mentioned, still doing very terribly. Migration there. Number 4 spot went to The Color Purple from Warner Brothers. As I said, this film's only really going to be making money domestically. It costs around $100 million, so this film needs to make $250 to $300 million worldwide to break even. Probably not going to get to that amount of money based on the numbers that we're seeing right now. Anyone But You from Sony, again, 50% increase there, so definitely on the higher tracking, or doing better than I think what would have been anticipated. So apparently there are couples that are going out to see that movie. New film from MGM, which means from Amazon, The Boys in the Boat, got the number 6 spot there, $8.3 million. Going to be harder to track that one because typically when it comes to Amazon releases, we don't always get all the information available to us. Iron Claw from A24, fantastic film, one of the best films of the year. Glad to see that film got a 4% increase from last weekend, and it's been doing pretty well, right? It opened up to around 5 million and now it's up to 16 million. So it's been able to basically triple the amount of money it made after its opening weekend. So very good to see that happen. Hope more people go to see it. It is still not in the financial safe territory, but I'm thinking and hoping if it has numbers like that in the future, it will continue to move in that direction. The new film from Neon, Ferrari, is a movie that's gotten some attention. I've heard mostly negative things about it personally, and it cost quite a bit of money in the $80 to $90 million range. So a $10 million opening is abysmal. So it's looking like it's going to be a massive flop for Neon. Neon not typically known to be in this type, to be in this space as prominently, right? We don't talk about Neon a whole lot as far as theatrical distribution is concerned, but apparently no one is going to see this movie, which is, I think, interesting because the trailers, I thought, would at the very least bring out a certain audience. Doesn't seem like they're showing up for that movie. Hunger Games: Battle of Songbirds and Snakes, after 7 weeks, is still out. Only dropped 5%, though it is definitely on the way out at $849 million. And so even though this movie definitely outperformed, did better than expectations, still nothing compared to the other films in the franchise. And then rounding off the top 10, The Boy and the Heron is still in the top 10 discussion. So it dropped out of 640 screens, and so it is definitely on its way out, as is Godzilla Minus One, but I think both of them ended up having some very good runs for the kind of films that they were. Happy to see Godzilla Minus One in that, as it is also one of the best films to come out this past year. Going into the worldwide numbers, as you can see, Wonka right now, the numbers is reporting at $379 million, and as you can see also from historically, it is going well and above and beyond the historical standards. So this is, again, what 95% of the films who have an opening weekend like that of Wonka tend to do. So this film is overperforming what most films tend to do, and that is tracking it over the last, I think, 5 years or so. So very cool to see that. The film is not the best film in the world. It's not a terrible film either. It's kind of a decent movie. On Critic List, I gave it a decent score. I thought it was fine. It pays a lot of homage and a lot of respect to the source material, which I think is one of the reasons why more and more people are seeing it. It's safe for families to watch, and that's not something that's very common with Disney putting out schlock every single year, every single month, it seems, and us not being able to really trust what they put out, especially when it comes to, thinking of bringing our children to go see those kinds of movies when they're trying to push all these different agenda items. And so Wonka, I can say, does not have that in there. And turns out a lot of families seem to trust the brand, or at least seem to trust the marketing for the film, as is the case, as we've seen this film do a lot better than initial numbers reporting. And I said that was likely going to happen over the holiday frame. We saw something similar happen to the film Puss in Boots. I think Puss in Boots was a far superior movie, but we still saw them dominate that family audience. Wonka right now is getting the family audience that is not going to see films like Aquaman, for instance, which, as you can see, a massive number overseas, but really nothing as far as its domestic run is concerned. Now, same thing with the charting. It's doing better than expectations as far as what 95% of films do. But remember, it had that holiday frame, and so that is going to that's going to have to be taken into account. Do not be surprised if this coming weekend we see those numbers drop quite a bit. But also, the other big thing, the elephant in the room with this movie, is China. $30 million is what's being reported right now over at thenumbers.com. And as you can see, China is taking up the largest portion of their international. And so do not be surprised if it ends maybe even somewhere around that $100 million range in China specifically, maybe ending closer to $250 to $300 million internationally. So when roughly a fourth of your entire box office is going to be coming from China, of which you only as a studio get 25% of those box office receipts, yeah, it might make your film look good or successful on paper, but this film is not going to be a billion-dollar film like the first movie was. I think this film would struggle to get to $500 million, and this is the kind of movie that kind of needs to get into that territory. And because especially it's going to be much more predominantly coming from the international audience and that international box office, it's in a lot of financial trouble. And hey, can't say I am that sad for a terrible franchise that has been the DCEU, and ultimately just, again, very, very nonsensical storytelling. Migration, a film that to me just looks very generic, and I just don't ever really care to see it. $100 million. I'm sure it's inoffensive. I'm not trying to go after that movie. It's just, I look at that, I'm like, okay, yeah, that looks like just a random movie that probably should have just been thrown onto a streaming service, I guess. But $100 million worldwide is where that film currently stands. Color Purple, no money coming in internationally, $45.3 million. It is a bold new take of a beloved classic. Again, you're going after a very specific audience with this one, and the fact that it's a musical is going to definitely push some audience out because some people just don't like dedicated musicals. So I look at this movie and I look at the numbers and I think, yeah, I don't think this film is going to be doing as well as you had hoped it to, and I don't be surprised if that one ends up being a flop also. Anyone But You, again, not my cup of tea, but apparently couples are going out to see that one. The Boys in the Boat, hey, looks a little bit more interesting at the very least. Based off a true story. You always love to hear that. $21 million, I think, is, again, probably better than what would have been expected. The Iron Claw, phenomenal movie. Go watch it. Seriously, even if you're not a wrestling fan, there's something in here, I think, for everybody, and it's very much enjoyable. Ferrari, Adam Driver, I think, is a very talented actor. Don't know what to think of it from the trailers at the least. It seems just a very weird movie, and that's kind of what I've been hearing from people that have actually seen it. $13.4 million worldwide. Not a good start for a film as cost as much as it did. Hunger Games, over $300 million worldwide. Again, fine on paper, but has to make quite a bit more than that if it's going to be anywhere close to even the lowest grossing of the previous Hunger Games films. And The Boy and the Heron, $130 million right now worldwide, so the film is continuing to increase its international numbers there, and we are, of course, seeing the film and its domestic run as well. Going to the charts, because we love doing charting here over at OMB Reviews. Let me see if I can increase the size of this real quick. Enhance. There we go. All right, so with all that being said, I mentioned Ferrari. $95 million is what the reported budget on this movie is, and so hopefully you can understand why this film is in a lot of trouble. At $13.4 million, right now the film is sitting around $134 million in the red. It needs to make roughly $237 million worldwide to break even. When you start off with $13 million worldwide, it's not likely going to happen for you. I'm sorry. Even if Ferrari was a phenomenal movie with that kind of a start, that would be almost impossible to pull that off. So I think that film we could pretty much already say is pretty much donezo. Color Purple, I would say, is also probably in that territory, but it is a little bit earlier. We still don't know exactly what the holds on that film are going to be. Definitely had a better start than Ferrari did, though not by all that much. This film cost $100 million, meaning it needs to make roughly $250 to break even. Starting at 45, when it's a movie that's not going to see a lot of international money, means this film is probably going to end up being a $50 million or so flop. We'll have to wait and see what the numbers are next week to make firm projections on that, but it's definitely not looking great for that film. Migration, now that this film has been out for 2 weeks, we can make some projections that the film might be able to make its money back. It seems like it's doing okay with the family audiences. I think that still, when you look to the film and the audience for Wonka is absolutely still doing a lot better with the audience, with the younger family demographic specifically. But Migration is definitely picking up some of that also. It's a generic Illumination movie, so it's kind of going to pick that up just by default. But the fact that we are seeing right now, the projections range somewhere between a loss of $21 million and somewhere of a gain of 12.9. If the movie continues to see very good holds, if it continues to do well past this holiday frame, we could see something similar to what we saw with the Puss in Boots movie, right? Not to say that it's going to have the same numbers, but if it has that same life to it, where it holds down the line that much further, then it keeps pushing itself on and on and on and on to not just breaking even, but also adding on to its profits. So as of right now, it's not looking great, but we still have a lot to wait for. Whenever it's the holiday season, especially, whenever it's the Christmas season, especially, these numbers can be a lot more impacted than in other situations, other times of the year. Iron Claw right now, also after 2 weeks, we can still project this film will probably end up being a loss at $12 million. My hope is that as more and more people start to maybe hear about this movie, maybe potentially we'll see this movie, it'll be able to maybe do better than what the projections are showing right now. Right now, I'm seeing a max projection for this movie of around $32 million. So this film is, again, predominantly going to be American audience, North American audience. But it'd be really awesome to see maybe if this film is able to get some kind of presence in other countries. Keep in mind that when we talk about wrestling, obviously people think typically of WWE. This is definitely an American family, but I'm sure that there are fans in the UK. I'm sure that there are fans across the world that might know the Von Erichs, who might, maybe they have some of that knowledge, some of that history, right? Wrestling fans who might be interested in seeing it. So it'd be cool if this movie was able to maybe get a little bit of a broader release. But I really want to see this film succeed. I think that it is one of the best films of the year, and I like to see not just really good films, but really good films be able to make money. We don't always see that happen, and it'd be really cool if that film was able to do so. Because of the numbers for Anyone But You, we're able to make some projections now. Again, a great second weekend for that. A great holiday week also means at a $25 million budget, this film is still not a guaranteed success, but I think it's moving more in that direction. Right now, around $18 million in the red. Don't be surprised if this film drops off by next weekend, but you never know. Right now, $18 million in the red, projecting anywhere from $11 million in losses to just under $1 million in losses. So definitely a possibility of the film breaking into that break-even profitability territory. What I don't think is going to be able to do that is Aquaman and Lost Kingdom. So these numbers might be a little deceptive at first. So let's go ahead and break this one down more fully. So because of the first 2 weeks numbers of 251, that means minimum projection for this movie worldwide is $359 million. Max projection is over $500 million. The problem, though, with this film is that it's predominantly coming from that international audience. So even if the movie does get to $500 million, guess what? Probably at least, if it got to 500, at least 150 million of that will be coming from China. And because Warner Brothers will only get a 25% cut of that $100 million, it might sound great to say they got over 100 million. Yeah, but that means they only actually got 25 million. Right? That's how the numbers work there when we deal with movies that get released in China. They have to make the deal with the devil, as it were, in many different ways when you have to make the deal with the Chinese Communist Party, and that is one of the costs that it actually has to do so. This is a film that I will do a fuller breakdown on when I try to do the biggest box office losers and winners as far as the actual studios are concerned. I have been working on those charts. I've shown some previews on certain streams, and also over on the Critic List box office page that I have posted over there as well. But what I can say is that this huge chunk of China definitely takes into account and definitely impacts a lot more movies than we would realize. In fact, I'll go ahead and pull up this number right here just to kind of give you a little bit of a mindset with the Meg 2 as being a great example. So remember, the Meg 2, right, got a lot of attention because it made almost $400 million worldwide. The issue with the movie, though, was it made well over $115 million in China. And because it made the vast majority of its money in China with a typical cut, and I know that some will try and argue, well, there was a Chinese firm behind it, or it had Chinese financing, and so therefore it's fine. You know, to my mind and to what I know, as long as you're doing business in China, they're going to get, right? The Communist Party is going to get its cut no matter what the company is, no matter what the studio is that's involved. So you're still not getting a lot of that money back because of that. So you could argue financing, right? That maybe the Chinese company paid Warner Brothers, and so therefore they didn't really see the losses because of that. But let's just, again, for the sake of argument, say, just to kind of get this point across, that did not happen. Well, at $116 million, that means that the movie is $55 million in the red. So at $394, right, a break even for that movie, because of it having a $139 million budget, was only $347. So $394 makes it actually sound like a winner, right? So on my initial charting, I actually had this film making some money. The problem, though, was, and I mentioned it at the time, was don't be surprised if it ends up being a financial loss because of the China number, right? When most of your money is coming from international places where you get 40% of the box office, and especially from China where you only get 25%, it's going to have a very, very bad impact. Another great example of this also would be the film Fast 10. Fast 10 made over $135 million from China, made $433 internationally. So of the $714 million, the vast majority of it came from overseas. Because of that, that film ended up being over $200 million of financial losses. It's actually one of the biggest box office bombs of the year. Most people don't think about it because they see that 714 and think, oh, that's pretty big. But then they forget the fact that the film cost $340 million. So budgets matter quite a bit. And so that's why when Tony and Nance bring up those numbers of $9 billion in box office and, oh man, Universal won by this amount, it's like it's a bunch of faguzzi. What's the word that Valiant Renegade says all the way? Fagazi? I don't even know. But shout out to Valiant Renegade. He has some fun language sometimes with these things. But anyway, because of that, Aquaman is going to be a pretty massive flop because most of its money is going to be coming from China in the long run. As I mentioned with Wonka, this film is now broken even, making some profits, and it's going to continue to do so. Don't be surprised if this film gets to upwards of not just $400 million, but maybe even $450+ million at the worldwide box office. That would not surprise me whatsoever. The Boy and the Heron is still out, so it definitely could still be able to make its money back. Godzilla Minus One, $18 million in profit. Glad to see that. Wish it could make more, but obviously I think the American audiences are done with that one. As we were talking about on the Salty Saturday stream yesterday, some audiences just don't like to read when they go to their movies. Makes me sad because I'm all on Team Subtitle, Team Sub, but you can't change people, and you can't change their minds sometimes. The Shift is also a movie, unfortunately, that is still kind of in that bottom tier territory. Not the biggest loss of the year, but definitely not as good as I think they were probably anticipating. And then lastly, I want to talk about Napoleon, because obviously we talk about Wish still being a massive financial failure. Trolls Band Together still looking like it's going to be a loss, but because of their VOD and their PVOD sales, Trolls might have a chance of making money on the back end. So not the worst of losses, but hey, going to call a loss a loss. But I want to talk about Napoleon for a second because I, again, have a bone to pick with Deadline especially, right? One of the things that I saw here was from Tony. Got to always call that Tony. Napoleon conquers $200 million milestone worldwide. Now, of course, that is an extra, headline that they've put into this article here. So that's what Deadline will do is they'll put a fake headline and then it attaches to a different article where they talk about it a little bit. But to say in any way that Napoleon is conquering the box office is just delusional, all right? This movie cost $200 million to make. This film only getting to $206 million means right now it's at $175 million in financial losses. Now I have not even really looked a whole lot at the financials for Napoleon because it's just not been doing very well. But look, the vast majority of its money has been coming from overseas, right? And so just for a second, $3 million coming from China, so that's not going to be a huge factor. Remember, they only get 40% of that 146. They get roughly 50 to 60%, so usually it's about 55% of the domestic there. So we're talking about a film that's probably well over $200 million in financial losses. So I don't see how you could ever say it's conquering or a victory or good in any possible way. And yet we see this consistently happen over and over and over and over again. And it's nauseating. Hunger Games still in the profitability territory, even though we know that film had to make actually less to make its money back because of some other foreign financing. But those are currently the numbers as they stand. Have you seen films like Ferrari, The Color Purple, Migration, Iron Claw, or any of the other films that we've mentioned? Are you surprised to see Aquaman 2 being a financial loss? Can't say I am. Couldn't happen to a nicer company and to a nicer studio. And also, what are y'all's thoughts about the fact that in all of this discussion right now, nothing is being talked about as far as Disney? Right? Because right now, the only major Disney release is Wish, and Wish is still only at around $176 million worldwide. And so look at this number here. It is a chart breaker. And I said that this was probably going to happen, that it was probably going to be one that performed a lot better down the road. Why? Because they had a delayed international release over time. They did the same thing with Elemental this year. The issue, this film is not doing Elemental's numbers. And so because it's not doing the same pacing, especially domestically as Elemental, whereas Elemental got very close to breaking even, this movie is not going to do so. And because a lot of that money is going to be coming internationally, this loss is probably also going to end up being well over $200 million. And so I can't wait to break these things down further. That's one of the reasons why the biggest box office winners and losers video is probably going to take into 2024 to get done, because some of these films are still out. And I want to try to be as accurate with that reporting and accurate as those numbers as I can. At the very least, wait for the first couple weeks of some of these brand new releases, especially films like Color Purple with a massive $100 million budget, to be able to give a full accurate take, and even Ferrari because of its massive budget, for the studios that they were partaking in. The difference, of course, Ferrari is not a part of a major studio that I'll be talking about in Neon. But those are the numbers as they currently stand. What are y'all's thoughts? Let me know in the comment section down below. If there is something else that you would like to see as far as regarding 2023, certain financials, please let me know also in the pinned comment. I tend to read the pinned comment more so than anything else if I can. I try to respond and heart as many comments also, but sometimes I'm not able to get to all of them. But this has been an amazing year, guys. Seriously, I can't believe 2023 is over and that we're going to be entering into 2024, and just how much the channel has grown over the course of this year. I'm still always very humbled by this. This is something I do for fun. I never thought in my life I'd ever be talking about box office, and I'd be talking about math of all things. I've always hated math in so many different ways. So just for this to be what I'm doing on, kind of as a hobby is just so much fun, and I can't do it without you guys. So seriously, from the bottom of my heart, thank y'all for an amazing year. I hope 2024 is even better, because there's less movies that are going to be released next year. Theoretically, it means less financial losses, but as we all know, if a movie comes out and it's probably got a $150 million plus budget, the chances of it breaking even are very high. If this year is any indication, and if you want a good example of that, let me just scroll through this chart for a second. This category right here, this column right here, right? These are what right now the current, based off of current numbers, projections are for the actual either losses or gains. The numbers in red, of course, are losses. The numbers in black are gains. Look at how many movies from this year actually have a black number next to it. Now, this gets us all the way back to, if y'all remember, Megan back in the early part of 2023. This was a surprise movie in the early part of the year. I think this actually was a January release, got around $90 million in profit. But from that point on, every single movie essentially was either a barely making profit or was a massive financial loss. Shazam 2, of course, was a pretty massive one. This is just, again, based off of the actual numbers and not what the actual budgets might be. Super Mario Brothers was probably the most profitable movie on paper. And I say that because if you look to the Barbie movie, some people might be thinking about that being the most profitable. Remember, for the studio at least, it will not be, because half of that, roughly half of that, will be going to Mattel. You could argue half of the numbers from Super Mario will probably be going to Nintendo as well. But I think ultimately, when you look at those two studios, it's a tale of very different studios, and we'll go further into that when we do the full breakdown of winners and losers by studio. But seriously, thank y'all again so much for a great 2023. Looking forward to 2024 as well. You guys are all amazing people. Have a wonderful rest of your day. A blessed and happy New Year, a blessed Christmas, and as always, God bless. And now for a special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members for the month of November, starting off with Father Luca Illich, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel, the name Eagle Rider. Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name. Matt317, check out his Twitch channel. Laura, the Mother Major General Story, Sorry, I didn't have enough spirit fingers there. Mr. Roy and ZK-Man, who you can check out over at xtheboundaries.co. If you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, check out the top link in the video description below. You get access to things like the giveaways channel, a podcast that I try to do every single month with a bunch of other awesome YouTubers, and a plethora of other content. So go ahead and check that out if you want more. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.